Okay, welcome everybody. My name is Rich Lee. I'm the Executive Director of the Jandoli Institute. And thanks for joining us on Media Studies Across Disciplines, which is kind of a mouthful. And I always start these sessions by explaining a little bit about what that is. And it's a project that we're doing. We actually started it during the school year, but over the summer, we're posting a series of papers on our website, most of them written by someone who was not a journalist or a journalism professor. As you'll see, tonight's a bit different. And they're writing about journalism from their perspective. And it's really been an interesting experience because myself, as someone who worked in journalism, now teaches in journalism, it's giving me an idea of what people see in our profession, what they see as maybe some of the issues. And it's also helped the other folks understand a little bit about how we work, what we do, that sort of thing. This is our fifth paper. We've had some really interesting ones. We had a philosophy professor, actually Barry Gann, on, who talked about how journalists might, use the Socratic method in doing their news judgments. We had a nurse who suggested that journalists adopt some of the ethical standards that medical professionals do. And last week we had a history professor who talked about the similarities between the 1920 and 2020 presidential elections, both of which were affected by pandemics. So that's where we are. As I said, tonight's going to be a bit different because Paul, instead of, our other speakers have been people from outside of the world of journalism connecting their field. Paul has background, tons of experience in journalism, and he's kind of connecting what he's done with the world of sports, which is obviously not totally alien to him, but that's his connection there. I'll talk a little bit more about Paul in a few minutes. I think most of the people on the call know him, but I just want to fill in the other folks on that. But I just want to introduce the panel before we start. And I want to say that putting these panels together has been a great experience for me personally, because I've been able to connect with folks that I've worked with over the years in different jobs and conferences and schools who all seem to have a common interest. I'm usually the common denominator. I often bring people together who don't know each other. Their only connection is they know me. We're a bit heavy on the St. Bonaventure connection today, which is not a problem. So, Nick and Evan, welcome to the Bona Bubble. I think we'll make you feel welcome. So let me introduce the panel, and you'll hear from them after Paul, and I'll do it alphabetically. Start out with Jordan Gathers. Jordan, glad you're able to join us. And Jordan is a Bonaventure journalism graduate, but he also was a member of our D1 basketball team, including our 2012 Atlanta 10 champion team. He's now chief of staff for the mayor of South Bend, Indiana. Also was a student of mine, so it's glad to see him succeed. I believe you were a student of Paul's as well, right? Yeah.
Yes, I was. Thanks for having me.
Okay. Nick Hirschon, and Nick, we've been corresponding by email. Did I say your name correctly? Okay, great.
Yes, you did. Thank you.
Okay. Nick's assistant professor at William Patterson University in New Jersey. He's also the author of 3 sports books. And Ann and I attend a journalism history conference. It's a great conference in New York City every March. This year was one of the first signs that the pandemic had hit, because it was one of the first things that unfortunately was canceled. And
I'm going to do what you did.
Yeah. And Nick is, heavily involved with that conference. And was it a year ago or 2 years ago you gave the talk on your book?
Right, about a year ago. Yep.
He wrote a book called We Want Fish Sticks about the New York Islanders' kind of strange rebranding attempt. And as he was talking, I just kept thinking of Paul Wieland, who most of us know is, created a fictitious Japanese hockey player, among other things. So I thought, Nick would be good for the panel. So thanks for joining us, Nick.
Thank you.
We have Chris LaPlaca, who's the Senior Vice President, Corporate Communications at ESPN. Chris kind of exemplifies the Bonaventure spirit. He's at the top of his field, working in a very demanding job, but he always has time for Bonaventure, faculty, professors, students. And I think, him being here tonight attests to that, because as we speak, baseball is opening up for the first time in 4 months or so. So, Chris, thanks for, taking a few minutes to join us today.
Thank you. We'll have some fun.
And lastly is Evan Weiner, who's a journalist who's covered many people and activities and events over the years. But he's kind of drifted into specializing in the intersection of sports, business, and politics, which ties right into tonight's topic. And I met Evan a number of years ago before I was back at Bonaventure. I was working for a public policy institute called the Hall Institute, which in some ways was the precursor to what the Giandoli Institute is. And by the way, I forgot to plug the Giandoli Institute, giandoli.net. You can read Paul's paper there and all the other papers, and also watch videos of the sessions like this that we did in the past. But I reconnected with Evan when I started the Giandoli Institute. You're going to see some of his stories on our site. And like I said, if you're interested in following him, just Google him, find him on Facebook. He's one of the most prolific people I know. So Evan, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Rich. And by the way, Nick, I have a question for Nick. When you did the book on the fish sticks,
Yeah,
did you talk to Stan Fischler about his resemblance to the
of course.
fisher?
Of course, I had to.
I'm going to talk to Stan tomorrow, so I'll tell him to say hello.
Okay, that'd be great. Thanks.
Okay, just a few words about format, which I went through a bit. Paul Wieland is going to start out. We're going to give him some time to talk about his paper. All the panelists have read it. We'll do, a round or two of questions from the panel. And the way the other ones have worked, we've just kind of opened it up then. We've had a very informal conversation, and it's been great dialogue in all of them. Folks in the audience, if you'd like to ask a question, the best way to do that, use the chat feature. I'll be monitoring that while we talk, and I'll either read your question or ask you to read it depending on what the question is and how things go. Just a few words of thanks before we start. Got to thank our sponsors, which is the Leo Keenan Faculty Endowment Fund and the Giandoli School of Communication. Have made this project possible. Want to thank our speakers, all the past speakers, especially thank Paul for being here tonight. Thank the panel. Most of all, I want to thank the audience. People who are being here. Really making this successful, whether you're on here live or watching the recording. So, with that, I was thinking about what to say about Paul because he's had such a long career, and I don't want to use our full hour or whatever going through his bio. I don't normally do this, but I asked all the speakers, authors, to send me short bios to include with their articles. So I'm going to read you what Paul said because I think it's a really good summary of 40 years or more of his career. Paul Wieland began his professional career as an award-winning journalist for 2 metropolitan daily newspapers. He was public relations executive with General Motors and public relations director of the NHL's Buffalo Sabres, where he worked on air in radio and TV. Spent a total of 40 years working as a director and producer of sports telecasts. In 2002, he joined the faculty of the Giandoli School of Communication at St. Bonaventure, teaching various writing courses, sports TV production, and on-air announcement. I will add that, he had the office next to me while he was, there. Retired from full-time teaching in 2017, but has never really retired. He written 3 nonfiction sports books and a comedic novel on the sports business. So with that, Paul, I will turn it over to you. As I said in the email, you're welcome to share the screen if you have any graphics, but you just want to talk, that's fine.
Okay, thank you, Rich. Hey, Jordan, Pat Vecchio says hello, special hello. Anyway, and Chris, and of course, I don't know the other 2 gentlemen, Evan and Nick, but I did have a little email with Nick. I'm sort of committing emotional harikari tonight because my background from the time I went into the sports business in 1970 was not only in public relations, but quickly turned into television sports, doing NHL hockey. Back in 1972, the Sabres were the first team in professional sports to put on its own sports telecasts of its games, totally produced by the team and distributed to cable systems in upstate New York. So, that's where I came from, and I was working on the air, and I decided I was better in a truck than I was on the air, so I fired myself, which is not the only time I ever fired myself in my life. But I am an age curmudgeon. I mean, I go back a long time, guys, so I can go back and take you all beyond your lifetimes, back to right after World War II, when I remember going to football games at the All-America Football Conference with my dad. No television, just football. I might add the league was a failure, but several of its teams were folded in the NHL or the NFL in 1950, including the soon-to-be champion Cleveland Browns. I remember when sports were hardly ever on TV. Seems like a lifetime ago because it was. in the first expansion, the second expansion of the NHL, I joined the Sabres. And by the time we went along, we were networked by satellite to cable systems in upstate New York. And we also provided, in the early days, Chris might not even know this or remember it, we provided some telecasts of Sabres hockey to ESPN in the first year or so when the NHL did not have a network contract. So they were available to cherry pick if they could get a team to give them games, and they got a few from us. I directed telecasts of indoor lacrosse in its infancy on ESPN, and directed and produced on the original NHL network. I even did a game for HBO with Stan Fisher way back in the early 70s when the HBO actually carried a few Kings games, and one was in Buffalo, the Los Angeles Kings versus the Buffalo Sabres. So over the years, I set up a business for the Sabres, and we actually did we did baseball, college basketball, lacrosse, indoor lacrosse, and indoor soccer, which is one of the weirdest sports you ever saw in your life. But we did those, and that was a business that I set up for the Sabres, and we made a fair amount of money producing and telecasts for other people over the years. So I came into St. Bonaventure when, in 2002, when the explosion of television was probably at its height in sports, when there wasn't just ESPN anymore, or the major networks. There was the Fox Sports Network. There were regional sports networks owned by various cable companies or investors all over the country, carrying major league and college sports and all kinds of sports. Sports became ubiquitous on television. In fact, I don't know what I've been doing for the past couple of months, except I found myself actually watching beach volleyball one night. I was so desperate to watch a sports event. So my position on this in my paper is that, and I'll use the example in a minute, is that without television, sport as we know it would not exist. Now, right now, the Major League Soccer, Major League Baseball tonight with Dr. Fauci's throwing out the first pitch. As Chris said, he didn't throw it very well. But Major League Baseball playing before empty stadiums. Why? Television money, exposure and television money. Major League Soccer holding a bubble tournament in Orlando. Why? Television money. St. Bonaventure's basketball team came back on campus during the summer this month. Why? They're not even talking about fall sports in the Atlantic 10, but they got to be ready in case the A10 is on there and it's on A10 television all across the country or on the networks, because that brings colleges money out of the television arrangements. I feel that looking at sports television has brought us to sort of a cliff. I mean, if the NFL can go along with it, they'll play NFL games without crowds this year if they have to. The television money in football is absolutely incredible, and the same with college basketball. The television money for the NCAA tournament, Division I tournament, the big dance as they call it, is incredible. The number that I've researched of media rights in television last year in the world was $73 billion media rights, and that's pretty much all television. Radio is a minor player. So that's where I come from about this. I'm upset about it in the sense that I don't know what the answer is. I know what the question is. What do we do? Does it keep going the same way? Do sports just become like studio wrestling, where they put a bunch of people around a ring and let a couple of professional wrestlers throw each other around, and that's the sport? Sports, are they going to be in the can, so to speak, within a bubble or within, how long do we have to wait for this? Because we don't know how long the coronavirus is going to last. It could last more than a year. We might miss another season of sports. So I throw that out at all of you. My contention is that without television, most of these sports wouldn't even exist. In fact, I'll give you my one example I mentioned was about the Miracle on Ice in 1980. The U.S. was playing the Soviets in hockey at Lake Placid. And in the old days of winter sports coverage on the networks, they didn't much cover a live hockey games. In fact, the only reason they covered that one is because it fit into the schedule that day very well. And it was between the Soviets and the U.S. national team. If it was between the U.S. national team and Finland that day, probably never would have made air. So it's the essence of my belief is that television has overcome, or the commercialism of television has overcome pretty much all the sports that we hold dear in North America and in Europe. That's about it, guys.
Okay. Thanks, Paul. Let me just kick it off with one question, and I'll go to the panel. And as I read your paper, Paul, I mean, I think you're right. Sports obviously has become a big business, a lot of money involved. But do you think the business side of sports and the joy of just playing sports and watching sports are mutually exclusive? You think both can exist?
Well, of course, the business can exist because it does exist. I just think that sports have become so much a commodity that kids who want to go into sports now, what's their aim? Their parents' aim: get them into the NFL, get them into the NHL, get them into the NBA. Very seldom are children allowed to play sports on their own, like I did, and maybe some of you guys did when you were kids. Just went and played sandbox sports. We skated on outdoor ice if it was available, and in Buffalo it always was. We played football on the local grass field that we could find. We played baseball and maybe put our own bases in, and we played, and no one bothered us. We played, and I'm so afraid that sports have become less fun and more a chore for young people because of the commercialization of them.
Okay. I do want to go to Chris, but Jordan, I saw you nodding your head while Paul was talking. Can you just talk about your own experience? I mean, I imagine you got into basketball because you loved doing it. Was there a point where it became more of a chore, or, I have to get this to the school, or, those sort of things?
Yeah, I started playing basketball at a young age. I think around 7, 8 years old. And I remember travel basketball was one of the big commodities growing up, and going to different states and playing against different teams. And, AAU basketball was very prevalent. And I think, even that time, you have the shoe companies, you have, you have a lot of different entities working together to make sure that these kids are being marketed, and you want to make sure that your brand is squeaky clean, and able to drive those ratings and to get to college or high school or to the next level. So it's pretty interesting. I mean, I think it's a multi-layered system. I think you would have to really break it down, from social media to shoe companies to universities to I think it's just a multi-layered process.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. Okay. Chris, I kind of wanted to go to you first because, not that we need responses back and forth, but I think you'd be interested to hear your perspective on Paul's take on what's happening in the world of sports.
Well, the first thing I thought of, I accepted this before I read Paul's paper because a Bonnie guy asked me to help out. And then I realized this whole thing is a setup. So I'm going to read the invitation a little more closely next time. I also want to say, you're pretty cool when you get 3 flags in your office. Jordan, good to see you on the screen. Haven't talked to you in a while.
Oh, thanks.
That's pretty neat. So listen, I understand what Paul is saying at 30,000 feet. Sports is a big business, and it's arguably, I would say, it's the most powerful entertainment genre on the planet at the moment, because it moves your emotions in ways that a lot of other entertainment products just don't. I always like to say, when your team wins a Super Bowl or a World Series, you see people running through the streets and what have you, and it sometimes gets out of control or knocking around cars and things. That's not good. But you leave a great movie or you watch a great TV show, you go have a drink or whatever, and used to, or you say that was good. Let's go to bed, honey. I mean, it's time for bed. Sports just moves you in ways that other things don't. And in this current climate, it is, as when you can stream everything on your phone, it is about the only thing that brings large groups of people together at the same time, which drives an entire advertising industry, and which drives several other industries, streaming, cable, broadcast, what have you. And I think the reason it does is because the things that Paul thinks might be lost, I would argue, are not lost, which is the thrill of competition, the never knowing what's going to happen next. It is the ultimate reality television sports. And, you know, when you see people overcome and upset a team that's supposed to win the game, or an individual player overcome an injury and go on to triumph, like that moves people's souls. I still think that exists. And television, I would argue, brings that to way more people than it ever used to, and many more people can participate in it. The other thing I think about sports that might go against the grain a little bit, or maybe Paul would agree with this, it unites people. We're living in a divided country. And there's a bunch of reasons for that. But you go, when you get to go to a game again, you could be a doctor or an insurance salesperson, or this doesn't matter. You could be a male, you could be female, you could be black, you could be white, you could be Republican, you could be Democrat, but you're a fan of the Yankees or the Red Sox, and you're combining and you're uniting and you're talking, and none of all the rest of the stuff that you walked into the game with, or you're watching with your friends at home with, matters in that moment. And we need more moments like that. And so, you know, I think television often gets blamed for a lot of ills, but I also think it bringing sports to the masses does a lot of good as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'd have to agree with you on, you know, a number of points, Chris. And it just reminded me that I'm a big baseball fan, and I think it was just a week ago tonight, a Mets intra-squad game was on, which normally, you know, who would care? But I was just so happy, and I thought I would turn it on for an inning or two, and I watched the whole game just, you know, for the joy of watching sports, of seeing, you know, those players compete. You know, it was the blue team against the white team. It didn't really mean anything. Evan, let me go to you, because you kind of come at this from a couple of different angles. What do you think about
And first of all, Paul and I met back in 1980 when the Sabres and the Islanders played in the playoffs, if you remember that, with Scotty and Al. But yeah, I do come, well, first of all, part of my education as a reporter was that I got thrown into the NFL strike. I got thrown into the NBA with the salary cap, and Uberoth stays with the Major League Baseball. But basically, it's the David Stern three-leg stool theory, that you need government, you need TV, and you need corporate. And John Nash was the general manager of the New Jersey Nets in 2000. He told me, he said, we have to go to the corporate model because we have to pay bills. But he said, even though we're losing fans in the arena, the fans could go right in front of the TV and watch the TV. And in some cases, it's a better experience than being, say, in the Meadowlands, which you would know, Rich, when you're sitting way, way up in the top in the 22,000 seat arena, although you miss the coziness of the fans. But you talked about TV, and David Stern told me that was the main tool that they used to reach the fans. They knew that they had the blue-collar fan, they knew they displaced. And they weren't making any apologies about that because it's available on TV. When I grew up in New York. There were 117 Met games and about 90 Yankee games, but that was an anomaly. Most cities had like 12 games a year. The Dodgers did 18. They did 9 against the Giants and 9 Sunday games. So when you look at TV, does TV bring the fans into the game? Because there are more people who go to the games, corporates buy it, but also the ratings are pretty high, except for baseball, which have leveled off over the years.
Okay, thanks. Nick, let me wrap up this section part with you, maybe from an academic perspective, or also from your perspective of having written a couple of books, which, as I looked at the titles, they seem to touch on the business side of sports. But I'd also like you to address another theme of Paul's paper, which is what we do as journalism educators. Are we doing the correct things? Are we focusing on the right things to prepare the next generation of journalists? So it's kind of a two-prong, question there, but if you could touch on those two, that would be great.
Sure. On the academic side, I would say, Paul was mentioning the kind of effect that television has on sports, and that maybe sports would not exist if not for television. But I think you could flip that around too. In the research that I just finished doing about a TV show that was a bowling television show in the late 1940s. And so I was looking at the very early days of television. And really, television became big because of sports. It was really the thing for people to follow. Sports are very easy to televise, especially something like bowling or wrestling that takes place in a limited view. You can kind of follow it pretty easily, as opposed to, in the early days of television when it was very small screens, the size of a playing card, grainy pictures. You really might not be able to follow the plot of a sitcom or a drama, but enough to follow, baseball. And so I think that that's still true today. Actually, before the pandemic, when we were talking about kind of the decline of television, a lot of people cord cut it. The reason why some people said they would cord cut would be sorry, I hear something in the back there. The reason why some people are not cord cutting is because they want to still follow their favorite sports teams, right? That's one of the main things that people said, well, I can get all this other content on YouTube or a streaming service, but I got to follow for me. I got to follow the Islanders live or the Mets live. Those are my teams. I can't find that out later. So I think there's still that kind of television has a reliance on sports, just like sports is on television. And then from, the other standpoint about what are we teaching, Richard was asking, how do we teach this? And, these sports writing courses, they've all changed. Paul, I think, mentioned in his piece that you don't even maybe have courses that are traditionally about how to write a game story anymore, because by the time that the fans leave this, fans have watched the game. They've heard so much about it on radio, television, social media throughout the entirety of the game. By the time they read a story, it's old to them. If you're really a fan, you're not going to wait to see what the newspaper had to say about it. So how do we kind of adapt our approach? And I think that's what we have to still figure out. The pandemic throws a whole other, wrench into it of what do people expect from sports coverage? Do they want to see more realism? And that's been, and also kind of the intersection. I'll kind of wrap up by saying this, the intersection of sports and other aspects of life. I've had students over the years who say they're very interested in covering sports, but then when I ask them about, are they well-rounded? Do they know a little bit about politics and culture and fashion and celebrity, all the other things? They're like, no, I just focus on sports. It's like, well, but look at what's happening in sports right now. If you're not following Black Lives Matter, if you're George Floyd, how can you follow sports? They're kneeling before how can you ask those kinds of questions? And now, of course, you need to know a little bit about the testing and tracing and everything going on with the pandemic. You can't just say, I'm just very narrowly focused on only my sport and my team. So I think if we could teach more of that too, just like, journalists should be well-rounded. And I think that's an important part of sports journalism education as well.
Hey, Lee, can I piggyback that? Nick, what you just said is so spot on, dude. You guys remember when Ray Rice had the thing with his wife in the elevator? We saw the video. All of a sudden, our NFL analysts who were talking about cover two and who's got the best running game, they got a comment on that. We were not great at it. And thank God we had a business called ESPNW, and we had some women involved in that who had some expertise in sexual violence, and they came to the rescue. And we had to get better at social commentary real quick, and it persists today. And one of the big narratives around my company at the moment is people think we've always said stick to sports. We've never said that. We want the intersection of sports and society. We want to be great at doing that. We weren't then. We're still learning today, right? And we're a lot better now. But it's sports used to be 3 minutes on local TV. It was kind of off to the side. It wasn't a multi-billion-dollar business it is now. And now it's massive. And I would say sexual violence became a thing after Ray Rice that everyone talked about. Go back to Jackie Robinson integrating baseball. Muhammad Ali, there's a million examples of athletes leading the way in social commentary. And it used to be there were few of them. Now they all are. And so when you say that, you are spot on. And it is a day-to-day, it's a difficult balancing act because some people want to go to sports to get away. I've had enough of that. I want to see who's going to win the game. But to be a responsible journalist, you got to find that balance, and every day it's a little bit different.
Chris, I'm going to add to that because in 2014, who was I wouldn't call him responsible, but who was the most important journalist, at least in the NBA, and that was Harvey Levin with the Donald Sterling story, which exploded. And again, my background is politics and business and all, and the intersect of politics and sports, but it was Harvey Levin who had the biggest story of the 2014 season with Donald Sterling.
Right.
And he forced literally Silver literally threw out Sterling after the advertisers fled, all because of TMZ and Harvey Levin.
Correct.
I want to go back to
Hey
what,
guys, I just want to jump in for a second.
Yeah.
I want to jump in for a second here because I think maybe my paper in some ways is misleading. I tried to explain at the beginning. I have nothing against televised sports. In fact, I made my living out of doing televised sports. I love telling stories with pictures and good announcers and doing a game or an event. And it's something I brought to Bonaventure and taught a course there for 12 years with a truck that we produced our own games in out of the campus. So I really like television. My position on this is not that there's anything wrong with television in sports, but that television is wagging the dog right now. That whatever television needs, and I mean this sincerely, it gets from the major and some of the minor sports just to get on. For example, the National Women's Soccer League is playing in Salt Lake City, and their games have been on. I think the championship game of the tournament is Sunday on CBS. And that league would probably the girls would stand on their head, and I'm not being offensive, to get on television because they weren't getting much exposure since the women won the World Cup a couple of years ago. So they're basically whatever CBS says, they're going to do, whatever time they're going to play the games, so on and so forth. And that happens with ESPN events, and Chris well knows, we all know that a lot of times. I did basketball for years, and I used to get the dreaded noon game on Sundays when a lot of times when they play a lesser conference game, and I would be directing I'd be directing on the campus of Hartford University or something like that. But there's nothing wrong with that. But I'm saying, television, that's what I'm saying, is that there's, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it. Not at all. I'm saying it's just questionable what's going to happen if television is always wagging the dog. Except
Sonny Werblin was the owner of the Jets, and he had a relationship with David Sarnoff. Sarnoff got upset that Bill Paley paid the NFL between 65 and 70, and he calls Sonny, how much did that SOB give the NFL? And he said $35 million. And Sarnoff said, here's $35 million. Go build yourself a football league, the American Football League. So television wagged the dog there. Sarnoff's money went into Joe Namath, and we know what happened after the Jets signed Namath, Super Bowl and all that. And it's all because of David Sarnoff telling Werblin that SOB, he hated Bill Paley, how much did he give you? And the AFL was able to spend the money that Sarnoff gave them, created the league, and now you have a Super Bowl, partly thanks to that, because of TV.
I want to go back to the conversation that Nick and Chris were having about how, sports is more than sports, it's political and social. And as, Jordan, did you ever feel pressure to be more than just a basketball player where people, did were you cognizant of the fact that people looked at you for, if you maybe tweeted something, or if you had an opinion on politics or something, you kind of predated the whole kneeling for the anthem controversy, but issues like that?
Yeah, I believe sports aren't just about actual competition. They're more. I think they're just as much about the athlete themselves and their views and their ideas and things they take on and the journeys of how they got into the place they've gotten to. So I definitely agree that I never really felt pressure. I was always confident in what I felt and expressing myself, but I can see that playing a factor in many athletes.
Okay. I'm going to go to the audience, but first, anyone on the panel, I said you'd have an opportunity to ask questions. I was kind of asking you questions. Anybody have a question or something you want to ask Paul specifically about his paper? Okay, well, let's see. We've got a lot of questions here. Let's start with Paul. I'll just read hers. Where do you see women's sports and commercialism today and the future of women's sports? I think, Paul was a bit getting into that discussion. Folks on the panel, what do you say?
Well, I'll jump in. We're a big believer in women's sports. Our audience is pretty diverse, and we do have a lot of folks who care about women's sports. By the way, many times the audience who watches women's sports is majority male, and for any number of reasons. So it's not a women like women's sports and that's it. It's not like that at all. And look, WNBA is going to start up. We're happy about that. It's, people unfairly expect. WNBA has been around 20-something years. The NBA has been around for a lot longer. So on the learning curve, so to speak, or the growth curve, they're in a pretty good position. But unfairly, they're compared to the NBA. If you look at women's sports singularly and within their own framework, there's been a lot of growth there. But the economics are not equal yet, and that might take some time. But they, using the NBA as an example, people have maybe unrealistic expectations in terms of but that sport, the way it's played beneath the rim, it's more about teamwork, in my opinion, and they're athletes. I'm telling you, they are athletes. But it's not about who can dunk. It's about who can play together as a team and spacing. It's just a different kind of game, but it's the game I played in high school, right? So I really appreciate it more because I can't do what the NBA guys can do, and they're both great. So I feel when people look at women's sports, they're, as a television property, we're all in a lot of different ways. But you have to have it's unfair to make those comparisons, and I think too many people do. And it's all happening, and it's happening organically, and it's evolving, and a lot of people are interested in them. And I just feel like unfairly they're under a microscope sometimes, and people just need to take a chill pill because sometimes it's just gonna take time.
Paul, you want to jump in on that? Because I know you did both men's and women's basketball games at Bonaventure. And Jordan, if I recall correctly, didn't you do some announcing of the women's games?
I did, yes.
Yeah. How was that for you?
He was cheap.
He was cheap.
Cheap talent.
Paul was in my ear a lot.
Yeah. So did you get a kind of more of an appreciation for what journalists do working on that side of the booth?
Oh, most definitely.
And Paul, what about some of the difference? Maybe it starts at the college level because here at Bonaventure, we've been about basketball for years, but we had a pretty decent women's team at the same time Jordan was here, but they weren't drawing what the men's drew.
Well, I think women's basketball has been on the college level, except for some markets, obviously Connecticut, Notre Dame, Oregon, places like that. Women's basketball has not obviously challenged men's basketball for total fan support. I think when it's well played, it's very interesting. And I draw another women's sport, which I've actually just covered with television with students, and that's women's soccer. Watching the World Cup team, the Women's World Cup team, I enjoyed that more, frankly, than any single soccer game I've seen by any other team on the U.S. men's team or even the World Cup with men. I think watching the women's team, they were so well coached and that had such talent that they were a pleasure to watch, even though the game isn't as fast as men's soccer. It's just so beautifully played that I think it's a sport that's artistic. And certainly, if you think about things like gymnastics, I mean, women's gymnastics, beat all hold and over men's gymnastics for fan appeal. And I'm sure they're pretty girls, but they also do things gymnastically that are just absolutely incredible to watch. So there's a great deal of great women's sports that are available to television, and they're starting to get their exposure now, and that's fine.
When you talk about the Olympics, and Chris would know this, in the United States, in the Winter Olympics and the Summer Olympics, what are among the most popular sports rating-wise in the two Olympics, whether it's winter or summer?
Well, I think, Paul, we haven't done the Olympics in a long, long time, or at least a larger company, ABC, but I know figure skating is always popular. Gymnastics, as Paul just mentioned, very popular.
And it's women.
Right.
Those are the women. That's what NBC goes after, right? In the
Correct.
ratings?
Correct.
Okay. Interesting comment from Will. Any women's team at the elite level is much more technical and team-oriented, which I think ties into our conversation. Wanted to turn to Barry again. Barry, I'm going to unmute you because you had two questions. They both were, kind of interesting. So if you can maybe pose them both. I mean, one was about your experience trying to get kids involved on a Sandlot level, and then your other one was about how this whole issue originated.
Yeah, the questions are related. I noticed that my kids wouldn't play sports unless it was in some league or other, and they didn't know how to go out on a field on a Sunday afternoon and play with their friends and organize a baseball game or a soccer match. And so I got together a bunch of parents to see if they would play. And without belaboring the point, what I'm trying to say is I think that the minute we started organizing Pops Warner football and Little League, kids stopped becoming interested in just playing games for fun in the afternoon. I would play with my friends. We'd have one team one day and another team the next day, and we'd want to win each day, but we didn't have a league where we had to focus on 3 or 4 months of how we're going to perform and who's going to yell at us. We just tried to do our best in the Sandlot. And so I think that it's long before TV that the commercialization and the ownership of and the control of sports begins. That's my suggestion. I'm curious to hear what others think about that.
Okay. Nick, let me ask you, because I mean, you and Jordan, I guess, are the younger members on the panel, so you maybe kind of grew up in that era where it wasn't like it was when Barry and I were kids, and you just go down with your friends and have a game. Was everything organized and strict when you started out?
I mean, I'm so athletically clumsy that compared to Jordan, I'm so inept, and he's gonna. So I won't even go there. I'll let him handle some of that. But I mean, I think even when I was growing up in the '90s in New York, there wasn't a lot of the kind of what I guess Barry was saying. There wasn't a lot of like impromptu, just like kids ringing your doorbell, hey, you want to play, or just it was a lot more like he was describing. Join the Little League. I was in like some YMCA, CYO kind of leagues, where it was, much more organized, but also as he kind of mentions, then it kind of becomes like almost mundane or forced, or like, it loses that sort of just like, oh yeah, I'm just going to get my pals from the neighborhood. And, it becomes like, oh, we have another soccer practice, or you got to do this other thing at work or on drills. And it maybe takes out some, and then of course there's the whole other thing we could go on, I guess, forever about of parents getting involved. Luckily, my parents were never like, yelling at the coach or the umpire or anything like that. And maybe again, I'm curious what Jordan's experience was if he had, people who were, there in the, in the arena or his friends, yelling and all that. But that gets into a whole other dynamic that I guess can take away from some of the fun for some people of participating in sports.
Jordan, at a real base level, I mean, maybe is basketball a bit different? Is it, people just tend to go down to a court? Or does it lend itself more to pickup games than, say, basketball or than football or baseball?
Yeah, I think basketball, you have 5-on-5, and I think, but you can grab a number of friends and just go play 1-on-1, 2-on-2, 3-on-3. And so my experience growing up was whenever a court was open, we were going, me and my friends, or if you didn't know anybody, you would play against each other and have that competition, and you were playing for the court sometimes, and when you would lose, you're off, and so you kind of built this culture of winning, and so that was basically my experience. But I think now in today's era, a lot of kids, it's not really like that, going to courts outside or going to random gyms. It's more organized and more you have more like structured open runs and competitions nowadays.
I have a point of
I
view
wanna
on
interrupt
Go ahead, Chris.
youth sports, because there's a couple of things here. I think Paul's paper is absolutely apt and appropriate for what's happening in a lot of kids' sports. Forget about the professionals and the major colleges. In Connecticut, my daughter plays travel soccer, and there's the town travel team. There's 2 other soccer clubs, and the clubs care about getting as many kids in their club so they can make more money. And it is my kid just wants to do travel, play for her town, play with her friends. They got a good team. Other kids are on another club team. Maybe they're double rostering. And there's always been this tournament in our town every September, Labor Day. And now one of the clubs is competing with our town. Like, why? No one seems to care about the kids. It's like, let's get as many teams and as many kids writing checks as we can possibly get. The flip side, I think it's horrible. I'm angry about it, frankly. The flip side is if you look at the statistics, there are many fewer kids playing sports, period. Some of them are because there are no facilities. There's no fields. There's no courts. They're in some of the areas that kids live in. Some of it is there might be, but some families can't afford to, for the kids to do it. The equipment's too expensive, whatever it is. And so we've been involved with Dick's Sporting Goods and a variety of the leagues. That's good for nobody. Kids should play. And if because of a lack of facilities or economics, we can help. And so we're doing things with the leagues, Dick's Sporting Goods. We're building facilities and baseball diamonds and what have you, just so kids can play and stay out of trouble and whatever. And so there's a whole nother, you could do a conversation just on youth sports, Richard, if you wanted to. It's crazy what's happening. But a lot of it is because no one just gets like I did, like we all did. Hey, you want to play? Yeah, let's go play. Barry said it right. That's how it used to work, and it doesn't anymore. And it's a whole nother set of circumstances in and around that whole conversation.
How about kids who play travel hockey? You might have
6 a.m. practices.
Yeah, well, not forget the practices. I'm in the New York City area, and you might be down in Philadelphia. You'd go to Philadelphia and then the Valley Forge, play 2 games, and come back up and maybe play a 3rd game in New Jersey and get home. Where are the kids doing their homework? In the car. And the other thing is, and somebody, there were speed skating coaches I was talking to about this one day, and they said, how about the kids who are on travel teams, particularly in hockey? When do they have the time to build up friendships with people who don't play hockey, or just go out in the street or just go to a local school and just throw a ball around? Travel hockey, there's a lot of romanticizing of it, but if you really think of it, is it good for a kid's development? I'm talking about mentally or friendship-wise.
Yeah, I think this conversation is leading into a question we have from Christopher. And Christopher, I'm going to unmute you, or you can unmute yourself. But actually, the second paper we had talked about something good coming out of the pandemic. Just to summarize it briefly, that was written by some sociology professors who said it might cause us to focus more on the environment. And I think your question is kind of takes the same approach. You know, maybe all these games without fans are going to get us back to the roots, the sandlots. But you can probably ask it better than I could.
My point was a lot of athletes, when they start becoming marketed and they start to see the dollar, it's not that they lose the joy of the game, but they lose that nostalgic feeling of when you're a kid, like what Jordan had said, or Barry, where you hop on the court, and what Jordan said, you're playing. If you lose, you're off the court, and you might have to sit 4 or 5 games before you can play again, depending on how many people show up down to the blacktop. And with what Barry was saying, playing baseball, we used to play that here in Olean when I grew up. We'd play hockey, pick up baseball, the whole neighborhood's down in North Olean. And the point was, will it bring them back to that joy? I mean, they don't have any fans to play up to in the stands. And I also had stated the journalism aspect. It's almost got that feeling like an empty park, but it's not radio, it's TV. Like when you could hear it on the radio and you could hear the stands, but they'd block the fans out and they'd do the broadcasting a few minutes behind and add stuff to it. So it's kind of tying it all together, where the journalism is going to bring the love of the sport back to the fan in the broadcasting, but the athletes themselves, I think they're going to have a little more fun with it. It's going to be more into it with each other.
I mean, Paul, what do you think about that? You think that's possible we might head up in that direction?
Well, I never had a coach until I was playing high school football. Everything was sandlot in my neighborhood, including hockey. So we sort of worked it out by ourselves. We always wanted to follow heroes, but we couldn't even see them on television. So it wasn't until high school I had a coach, and maybe it held back on some of the talent. But Scotty Bowman, the Hall of Fame hockey coach, once told me, watching a practice with me of younger kids, very regimented practice, okay, 10-year-olds. He said, this is stupid, having travel teams. Everybody should play at the same rink, at the same, and play in their hometown, because the cream will rise to the top. The NHL players with that much talent will rise to the top. And one of the great examples of that was Patrick Kane, who plays for the Chicago Blackhawks, who played just in a local rink in Buffalo until he was about 12 years old. And then he was discovered, if you will, and was able to move on. But instead of being forced to play on certain travel teams until then, he just was a kid hockey player. So that's the way it should be. Kids should be players. They shouldn't be under coaching. Well, I don't know about coaching. They shouldn't be under regiments, travel teams, or fundraising, or all that kind of stuff that's ancillary to the love of the game they're playing.
Gretzky once told me, and Greg Stephan, I guess they live next to each other. We played hockey October to April. That was it. Then we broke out the baseball and the gloves. And he said, you need the break. You cannot, as a kid, be regimented, like you said, because you're going to burn out. And I've seen kids who had talent, because over here, they just burnt out by the time they were 13 years old. They didn't want to do it anymore.
Okay, I want to go to another question about where we may be heading, and that's from Steve Coca. Your last question was on maybe going back to the roots. I think you're suggesting that things might go in another direction, Steve.
Yeah, Barry, first of all, Paul, I really enjoyed your paper, and I really understand what you're trying to say. And I wanted, my point was about this financial appetite that broadcasting has. And I did not write it in the question, but I wanted to offer some proof and the experience that I had as a teacher. I was a 5th and 6th grade teacher, and every year I used to monitor how my kids, my boys especially, how the boys came dressed for each season. And I watched carefully to see did they wear jerseys of their favorite teams. And the only one that won, the only one that consistently won was the NFL. And I began to ask, why do they wear more NFL jerseys? No baseball jerseys, hardly any hockey jerseys. I didn't see any NBA jerseys. I saw nothing except a few smatterings of NFL jerseys. And I asked the kids why. And they said, because we can watch the games. They're during the day on Sunday. The baseball games were all at night. The hockey games were all at night. The basketball games, maybe on a Sunday, true, but most of the time it was because they could watch their heroes play the game. So there's a real proof right there of the tail wagging the dog. The money was in the broadcasting of the games during prime time, and in so doing, I'm afraid they lost the kids. They lost the kids that would support these sports. So I think it's going to be a backlash. I mean, I think, you know, this pandemic, yeah, that's causing the fact that there's no people in the stands. But wait till it comes back, if it comes back. And I think it's going to be really, really tough to get fans to come back, because I think it's going to be too expensive for normal people, regular people. And I think kids will have lost interest in it.
Well,
What do you think?
can I jump in on that, Rich?
Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
That's a real thing, Steve. It's a real thing. And everybody on all sides of this equation, leagues, media partners, all know it. And you see the growth of digital media now. A lot of people who are much younger say they're fans, but they fan, quote unquote, to use it as a verb, differently. They follow their favorite athletes. They watch highlights on YouTube. The game is on, they're not watching, they check a highlight, you know, because it's available almost instantly. And so, you know, media companies, you could either, it's chicken and egg, I don't know. I'm not smart enough to figure out which came first, but we have a very vibrant digital media arm that serves younger fans that way. You try to get them to watch a game, but maybe they're not interested, they're doing something else, they're multitasking, whatever. It's a whole thing. Part of the effort I mentioned earlier about working with the leagues to get more kids to play is maybe when they get older, they will actually be fans. You know, and so there's a longer term view and some of the stuff I mentioned earlier as well. So it is widely known, widely understood. There are things going on to try to address it. But, you know, it's larger than just sports. People consume content these days much differently than they used to, period. Doesn't matter if it's sports or anything else.
People want to watch a 4.5-hour Yankee Red Sox game every week.
Yeah.
I do.
Yeah.
By the way, it's Yankees 3, Nats 1 in the bottom of the third. This just
Okay.
in.
I
Thanks for the
use
update,
Yankee
Chris.
Red Sox. I just use Yankee Red Sox because those games run long. But the average baseball game when I was a kid was 2 hours and 12 minutes. What's it today? 3 hours? I mean, people have the attention span anymore for that.
Right.
Over
Right.
3.
It is
Yeah,
over
I
3.
think the nature of the sport too, and I'm someone who loves baseball, but you know, younger people, it just doesn't have the action that basketball or football may have. So, yeah. So we're coming to the close of an hour, and you know, I'm sure we could keep this going for a while, but I wanted to thank everybody, and maybe just go around once to the panel, and we'll give Paul the final word. You know, just some thoughts on this. Like the other ones, I think it's been a great discussion. This is why we put this project together, to get people talking, journalists, non-journalists, about what we should do. And I just want to remind folks, we're not doing another one of these for 2, 3. We have the next 2 sessions. We're going to post papers, but there's not Zoom sessions for them. So our last one will be on August 13th. So if you're interested in following these up, follow the Gendoli Institute on Twitter and Facebook, or our website, gendoli.net. Our last paper is going to be an interesting one. It's by Xiao Xing, who is one of our biology professors, and it's on why people don't believe science. So I'm really looking forward to that one. It's obviously very topical, but let's just kind of wrap up our topic, and maybe I'll go in reverse order of how I introduced the panel. So start out with you, Evan. Any closing remarks you have, or something for Paul?
Not really. I mean, television's important. Television pays the bills. The Olympics. Who's paying the bills for the Olympics? Comcast, NBC. I don't know. When I was a kid, I never thought of sports as a television show, but that's what it is today, a television show. And that's great because the money comes in and it keeps people like Chris working and me working and everybody else. But, it's not the 1963 version of television anymore. This is, as David Stern told me, we are trying to get people eyeballs in front of the TV. And that's our biggest goal. And we create stars and we create interest in the stars, the Michael Jordans of his day. And there's nothing wrong with it. It's a TV show. It's like Jeopardy, or it's like whatever other TV show. It's entertainment. That's all it is entertainment. In fact, Chris knows his company is Entertainment Sports Programming Network, right? What's the E stand for?
That was the original name. Yes, sir.
It's entertainment, and television delivers, or video. Maybe it's not television, but video delivers. It may be onto here. It may be onto the screen here, or it may be onto the screen over there. And people sit and watch it, and that's how they consume it. And it's not a bad thing.
Okay, thanks. Chris, final thoughts. Hopefully you didn't feel like you were set up too much. I think it was a...
No, it was good. By the way, Paul Wieland can say anything he wants. I love that guy. It's great to see you on the screen, Paul, man. You're a treasure, truly. No, you are. You're a treasure. We're lucky to have you in our sphere here, and I mean that sincerely. I'll say something maybe a little provocative. We just announced, Major League Baseball and ESPN, a brand new playoff format. Baseball's created, not at our behest, but I'm sure they had television in mind. I'm sure they had evolution in mind as well. But 2 minutes ago, it was announced that this year they'll have a different playoff scenario, kind of like a bracketology kind of thing. Wild card play-ins, so to speak. There will be 8 series, best of 3, to determine the teams that will go further and eventually get to the World Series. So more teams making the playoffs in a wild card format. And ESPN will televise 7 of those 8 series. Now, this was not an idea that we went to them and said, you should do this. But baseball is getting older, younger people, to Steve's point earlier. What are we going to do? March Madness is great. Everyone loves it. And so when they came to us, we interested? Yeah, we are, because for a variety of reasons. And so, that single announcement in and of itself, I think, speaks to a lot of what we talked about, and we could talk about it for another 25 minutes, but that's an example, I think, where Paul is going. And I'd argue that's maybe was television in mind, but baseball needs to get younger and evolve as well. And maybe because of the way the media environment's evolved, who knows? It's just fascinating, and that just happened while we were talking. So it's a timely announcement.
Yeah, that's great. We have breaking news on one of these, but it looks like I'm going to have to do some studying to see exactly how that's going to work. But it sounds exciting. And Paul, I just want to tell you that Chris means what he says. That he would do anything for you. When I sent out the email invitation, I think he wrote back right away. Got an email. I want to do this. Let me just check my schedule, and he's here. So.
Well, I want to know if we can get the Canadian border open. I want to go fishing.
I don't know. Can't
help you there.
Yeah.
Rich, I just want to put in a little note. Since I noticed that we have quite a few alums that were at the 100th anniversary of our men's basketball program. All right. We have Fred Crawford's goddaughter, Star Greer, who is playing for us this year on Bonaventure's women's basketball team. So what goes around comes around. So it should be an exciting year.
That's great. Thanks for sharing that, because I don't think some of us would have made that connection. So. Okay, continue with the panel. Nick, hope you enjoyed our conversation with all these Bonaventure people. I'm sorry we didn't get to see you in New York. Hopefully we'll be able to have that conference in person, next March. But just some closing thoughts.
Yeah, well, first off, I want to say, so I'm not from St. Bonaventure, but I did go to St. John's University, so I have some sainthood involvement. I just want to let you know, I do belong in some way. But thank you all for having me. So like I studied media history in my PhD program. And so I'm very interested in the beginning of like sports and television, as I was talking about before, and then looking at the current context, how is that about to change? And I think, we're going to look back and say like, what was the pre and post pandemic era, right? Of the way sports was presented on TV and in all sorts of media. But right now we're seeing it already, right? Fans not being at the games, piping in fan noise, cutouts of fans in the stand, all of these other sorts of things of where they're going to place cameras, where the studio analysts and all that sort of stuff. And then moving forward, how might the presentation of sports on television adapt to the fact that there are a lot of people now who are forming brand new routines? Like for me, 3 or 4 weeks nights out of every week, I would be watching sports. I mean, I would have gone at this point to like 20 Mets games or whatever in my season ticket plan, and so now that that doesn't exist, people have replaced it, and they may not come back, as we've kind of discussed, where it's going to be expensive to come back. So what will sports try to do to be innovative, to get people back? And I don't know. I would say that one thing might be, and I think Evan mentioned it before, but the entertainment aspect, viewing sports for better or worse, but more as an entertainment product. Sometimes that means, unfortunately, the sexualization of the athletes we've seen historically. Some of that can be just having celebrities at the game or celebrity announcers or all these gimmicks or things that might show up. But that's just something that I would say, like, as someone who's now studied a lot of sports media history, let's something to keep an eye on for the next several years as sports continues in this world.
I'll give you one word answer to that: access. More cameras in places they don't normally go, more microphones in places they don't normally go. You're going to see a lot of experimentation with no fans in the stands in a variety of sports, and that'll be a little bit of a window on where it's headed.
Yeah, that'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
Yeah, I mean, Nick made a couple of interesting points, but the one Chris picked up on was the one I was thinking of too. I mean, what we're seeing now is pretty much games covered the way they've always been covered, but there's a lot more things they'll be able to do. So, Jordan, you get the last word among the panel. So what are your thoughts on what we've talked about for the last hour or so?
No, I think this conversation was great. Appreciate everybody on here. It's great to see all the Bona family, and then also the other panel members. Thanks for having me. I really do believe that kind of the more popular sports have always been driven by ratings and the goal of generating revenue. But I will say that sports, there's nothing like it. It's hard to describe, but it's definitely a euphoric feeling. And I can definitely speak to the basketball culture. It's something everybody wants a piece of, and I know I did, and I definitely believe that it's why it's monetized. But I also believe that journalism, when it's done right, it's powerful. And when it doesn't seek power and when it seeks the truth. So I do believe that even though it kind of seems like it's dying down, it's the worst of times. I think there's brighter days in the future, and I just think journalism is being remade.
Okay, well, I appreciate that because you're a product of our journalism school. So I know, like Paul, as Dean Coppola was on too. Just one question: we talked about playing sports just for the joy of playing them. Now that your college career is done, you're playing pickup leagues or anything like that?
Oh, I still do. I still play in pickup leagues. I still play in pro-ams, and and so I play anytime I can.
Okay. Okay, and Paul, I want to thank you for making this all possible, because when I put out the call for papers among faculty, and you said I have an idea, I got it, and just so everybody knows, these papers were blind peer reviewed for folks who are not academics. Basically, they come in, we take off all the identifying information. 4 faculty members looked at them, and I was very glad Paul's got selected, because it's obvious we had a great discussion. So Paul, you get to close it up tonight.
Well, all I can say is, I come from the world of sports as an amateur hockey player. Particularly, I played until my 40s, and I played at a pretty high level until I finally retired. I know what Jordan's doing right now. I played sports for the joy of them. I never was. Well, actually, I did sign a pro contract once for $150, believe it or not. But and afterward, the coach said to me, "You weren't worth half that much." But anyway, I want to thank everybody for being here, and I certainly have had listened to your comments. I think this is the best kind of stuff that we can do, and particularly about sports tonight, because sports have been a great part of my life. And on that note, I will say the best sports thing I ever saw in my life was not on television. I watched it live. It was Nadja Comaneci in 1976 in the Montreal Forum, scoring the first 10 on the uneven parallel bars, the first 10 in the history of gymnastics. And I actually shiver when I think of it right now, that many years later. So a great performance is a great performance, no matter whether it's on television or not. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great way to end, and I think that speaks to the power of sports, which I think we all were addressing. So, thanks, Paul. Thanks to the panel. Thanks to the folks who joined us, either live or watching. It's been another great discussion. So everybody have a great evening. There's still time to catch the last few innings of the Yankee game, and we will see you next time. Thanks. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Good night, all.